So the topic of conversation in Britain today is about leaving the ECHR. Nigel Farage, the leader of the Reform Party, tried to submit a bill to do that. He was endlessly heckled by the midwits and the fatties of the Liberal Democrats, who called him things like Putin's pet, and thought that they were incredibly funny and brilliant, and accused him of trying to remove British people's rights and so on and so forth. All of that isn't really worth dignifying with an answer. Britain has had rights longer than most of Europe, and the idea that there would be no rights in this country if Britain left the ECHR is frankly laughable and undeserving of a response. So let's move on from that. There is a point of principle, however. The point of principle is that as a sovereign country, foreign courts should not have jurisdiction over Britain. That's a fair position to take, and that's the position that Farage himself has taken. So
there was this big vote about it about 10 years ago.
There was an issue of that. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, I remember some discussion around this topic.
It's also a central point about how our political system works, is that Parliament is sovereign.
Yes.
And if it's ruled over by foreign courts that aren't even based in Britain, let alone parliamentary, then it's no longer sovereign, and it undermines how our sort of uncodified constitution works.
Yes, no, absolutely. The point is, though, that for these midwits who pretend that ECHR is the source of rights in Britain, it's not stopping the government arresting around 300 people a day for tweets. I mean, the number of people who are being arrested for social media posts is 12,000, 13,000 a year. So the idea that ECHR protects against that, obviously laughable. But there is a more substantial point, which is that the reason that these kinds of arrests happen isn't because of the ECHR or a relationship with Europe. It's because of the pathetic quality of judges, MPs, civil servants, police commanders, etc., etc. So there's a much bigger issue here than the ECHR, which is why the title of this segment is just the first step. Addressing the question of the ECHR is just one step in terms of fixing a much bigger problem, which is that the establishment, the classes that depend on the taxpayer for their wages, are absolutely hostile. And that includes the quangocracy, and that includes the civil service bureaucracy, the police, the judiciary, and much more than that. Plus, it's not even a question of whether or not foreign criminals can be deported. The French do a good job sometimes deporting people that they don't want when they decide that they want to do this kind of thing. Other countries in Europe do engage in deportations. Hungary closes its borders completely and is part of the ECHR. So the ECHR is a bit of a red herring. It's not the actual issue that's preventing Britain from addressing a huge amount of the problems related to migration. It is one factor, but it's a small factor.
You can also, even if you were part of the EU, do what Poland does, which is just adhere to the things you want to do and ignore the things that you don't. Like, it doesn't have to be a straitjacket.
Exactly.
This notion that we have to adhere to it no matter what, or even be a part of it in the first place, is absurd. It's obviously people trying to appeal to some degree of authority around this thing because it's what they want. The outcome is what they want in the first place.
So what both sides are doing is using the ECHR as a fig leaf. The left pretends that the ECHR is the main guarantor of rights, and Reform is pretending that the ECHR is the fundamental problem. Neither of these propositions are true. And that doesn't change the point of principle that a foreign court shouldn't have jurisdiction over Britain, but these are the facts. There are good reasons that have been put forward to say the ECHR question should be delayed and shouldn't be the first thing on the agenda. And these mainly relate to Ireland and the Good Friday Agreement, and the fact that the Good Friday Agreement in part relies on the ECHR. The reality, however, is slightly different. First, the Good Friday Agreement has been in chaos for many years now. The Parliament in Stormont has been suspended for a total of 10 years out of the last 25 years that it's been in effect. And this didn't really change very much. Things kept on ticking along, and the problem of violence has been resolved. And the problem of violence isn't really a threat right now, because the Sinn Féin, having taken control of the Republic of Ireland, proceeded to pretty much betray the country and stab it 1,000 times in the back and flood it with immigrants in the same way that has occurred throughout the rest of Europe and in Britain, and so on and so forth. So the idea that if the Good Friday Agreement collapses because of the ECHR, well, that will spell a return to violence in Northern Ireland, we're seeing pretty much the opposite. We're seeing people raising the Irish and English and United Kingdom flags together to say that the actual problem is the defense of a white Christian Europe, not sectarian differences between Catholics and Protestants, or Irish grievances against the English, or English grievances against the Irish. Like, that's not the issue.
Well, there's not nearly as much bad blood anymore, really.
No.
There might still be amongst the older generation, but, you know...
There always is sometimes.
You know, one of my closest friends at university was an Irishman.
Right.
And, you know, there was no bad blood. He was just like, yeah, you know, England and Ireland are basically the same. And most people of my age feel the same.
Yes.
That there's no real problem here. And as you know, time goes on, there's going to be the prevalence of that attitude more and more. And of course, as well, Ireland's only one country, and it's much easier to negotiate with Ireland than the entirety of the EU with the ECHR. So actually, I would argue that it's probably better for both that we just do our negotiations country to country rather
bilaterally. Yes.
Exactly.
No, 100%. 100%. I fully agree with that. Plus, the precedent that was set by Stormont paved the way for the devolution that happened in Wales and in Scotland. And this was disastrous. Like, devolution is clearly not working. It's a bad idea. It's adding layers and layers of government that are completely unnecessary. And it's been captured, at least in Scotland's case, by insane, weird leftists who pretend to be nationalists, but are only nationalist against the United Kingdom. They're not nationalist in point of fact.
It's still quite similar in, well, Wales as well.
They're also socialists as well, which
yes,
is a bit awkward
all
as
of
a
these
title.
wrap in together.
Mm-hmm.
It all wraps into one big hate fest, really, of the traditions and customs and religion that made this country what it is. That's what it's all about. They hate themselves and they hate everybody around them, and they express it with weird ideologies. And you know, it's not a question of principle for these people. The other point to make is that the EU is going to work against a reform or right-wing government that's genuinely right-wing, unlike what has happened in the past, regardless. Like, the EU is going to declare total war on any government in Britain that actually seeks to assert sovereignty and that actually tries to reduce the number of migrants coming in and the migrants that are already here. This is a given.
Well, from the EU's perspective, they want to crush any country that asserts its own sovereignty because it undermines the whole European project, and therefore it's raison d'etre.
And for them, they don't believe in the popular vote. They believe that our democracy means the oligarchic expert class in charge, or the expert class servants of the oligarchs being in charge. They have the technocrats. The technocrats.
It means democracy. Our democracy is just the term for technocratic, nudge-based psychological control of the mass populace.
Exactly. Because the mass population is not to be respected, is not to be trusted, is to be looked down upon, spat upon, and downtrodden until it no longer exists. And if a government were to try to reverse that, with or without the ECHR being on the table, their reaction from the EU is going to be the same. And this is going to involve sabotaging trade, and this is going to involve trying to find ways to use the Northern Ireland issue as a wedge to weaken Britain further. They will do this to any country. Look at what they've done to Poland. Look at what they've done to Hungary. They will obviously do the same to Britain. So it should be taken as a given that even a Sivnat government is going to face the full wrath of the European Union and of the European bureaucracy. and that they will try to sabotage everything at pretty much using every lever of power that they have, and at every point in time where they find an opportunity. This should be the starting point. A big part of the problem, fundamentally, is that Farage, as usual, is very good at campaigning, but very bad on the detail. And what reform should be doing is pretty much gaming out how this plays out, and gaming out things like the reaction from the United Nations. Yesterday, the United Nations was getting very angry because the government of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil started shooting drug dealers.
Which is absurd, of course, because everyone knows about Rio's drug gang problem. It's not exactly a secret.
Exactly. They all condemned Nayib Bukele for asserting the sovereignty of the state in El Salvador. They're going to do the same against Britain, but it's going to be a lot more intense and a lot more vigorous. And what should be done is to game out the levers of trade and the levers of international law, quote unquote, that they will use to undermine reform. This is what they're going to do, and they will have the full cooperation of the blob, of the class of people that rely on taxpayers for their money, who work in the NGOs, in the civil service, in the judiciary, in the police, etc., etc. And the actual problem isn't just the ECHR, although in principle, yes, it's a violation of sovereignty. The actual problem is that there is really no plan for dealing with this. And these guys might go crazy. The EU might decide that deporting criminals is a violation of their human rights, and therefore trade sanctions must be applied. And therefore the EU is going to introduce tariffs. And therefore the EU is going to renegotiate Brexit deals and things of that nature. I mean, they're going to go all out. And
there is one sort of potential counter-argument here that I obviously agree with what you're saying, and they could do this to a degree of self-harm that could actually really damage the countries within the EU. But with the way things are going, particularly with Germany, France, Italy, they're probably not going to be in a financial position where they can take a hit, or at least it's going to make it so difficult as to undermine faith in the EU in the first place.
If you look at how they negotiated the Brexit deals, they didn't really seem to have very many concerns. Now, they were very much helped by the fact that the British negotiators were Remainers, and that really undermined Britain's position. And Britain does have pretty important leverage. This is one of the biggest markets that the Europeans have access to. Yes, true. But this kind of economic damage didn't stop them blowing up their own nuclear plants, and didn't stop them decimating their energy infrastructure, and didn't stop them staying silent when the Americans blew up Nord Stream, or when the Ukrainians attacked refineries in Romania and Hungary a couple of weeks ago. These guys are genuine ideologues, and their commitment to maintaining the illusion that they are the only people who should ever be allowed to govern outweighs significantly the economic damage that will be done to the population, because at the end of the day, they're still going to have their champagne and caviar dinners all the time, and they're still going to be flying business class everywhere.
I do agree that the people who are going to be making these decisions are the ones that are isolated from the consequences.
Exactly. And that's how they want politics to be. They want politics to be a game where they make decisions, others suffer the consequences, they suffer nothing. And if there is going to be some kind of genuinely responsive government, which is what reform is promising, but huge questions on their ability to deliver that, they're going to try to nip that in the bud. And they will try to undermine Farage at every point. And so on point of principle, yeah, fair enough. But in terms of actual preparation for what the EU will do, even if you don't leave the ECHR, be careful. Plus, there's a trap in there, in that if a new reform government sort of codifies some new Bill of Rights, there is a real risk that part of the things that they will codify will stop a future government from removing people's passports and denaturalizing them and sending them back, which is going to really matter if you want to do something about the numbers and about the instability that these numbers bring in. So this isn't clear sailing. The idea that the Human Rights Act and the ECHR get revoked and then some new Bill of Rights emerges. There's a trap within that. And it isn't obvious to me that Firas sees that.
Well, the obvious thing to do is not to have anything to replace it with at all, because ultimately they're just pieces of paper. They don't actually have any true enforcement. It's not like in the US where you have a Supreme Court that enforces the Constitution, and even then it's imperfect.
Yeah.
In Britain, it's even less enforced. And, you know, the Human Rights Act was enacted within the first year of Tony Blair's prime ministerialship, which suggests that it's something that was very important to him and instrumental in sustaining his power ultimately.
Yes.
Well, something fun that we were discussing before we came onto the podcast earlier when we brought up the subject of constitutions was that in Germany, the constitution under the Weimar period and the period immediately following it were the exact same.
Right.
It was the exact same constitution. So it turns out you can do a lot of different things under the same constitution if you as a political power just have the will to do so.
Exactly. And the actual problem is that there exists this massive class of people that rely on taxpayers for their ability to harm taxpayers, and reform doesn't have a clear plan to gut that. There is no plan to reduce the civil service by 50%.
To play devil's advocate here, this isn't something I necessarily believe, but especially based on lots of the things I've heard about Farage's character from people who've worked with him for years. But could it be that they're keeping a lot of this quiet because it would be strategically advantageous not to advertise it?
I hope so.
Because then they can put up measures to resist. But
I hope so.
I don't actually think that that's happening, but it is possible.
I heard at the gym the other day, I overheard one of the personal trainers speaking to a client talking about the theory that that woman who got in trouble for saying that there are too many black people in adverts, the party kind of disavowed somewhat, that they were using her as a sounding board for the more radical ideas to test public perception and reaction to them.
That personal trainer's a bit more savvy than you'd imagine.
And he was talking to some old guy who clearly was just sort of like, just make me lift the weights. He was like, yeah, man. But to be fair, you know, there is a potential truth to that, or at the very least, it could be unintentionally used for something like that.
Either way, it could.
It received a huge pushback, but also at the same time, there was a lot of support for that statement as well.
Yep, and it received pushback from the same people who think that rights in the United Kingdom depend on being in the ECHR.
Well, the same people who, frankly, would want what happened to Charlie Kirk to happen to Nigel Farage if presented the opportunity.
Exactly. And if you looked at the reactions from people in Parliament, you sort of see that this is exactly what they want. The MPs around Farage are just sort of... I'm not going to show you the clips because they're frankly disgusting, but you should go and watch and see what quality of people we're dealing with here and why they shouldn't be dignified with a response, but why they should also be taken very seriously in terms of their genuine intent to hamstring any government that tries to do something slightly different. They're going to deploy all of their media power, all of their legal power, all of their economic power, and they're going to try to paralyze Nigel at every single step. And it doesn't matter what happens with the ECHR. The presence of the ECHR doesn't prevent people getting arrested over tweets, and its absence won't change very many things.
Well, Morgoth always has a good point about the ECHR, where people will share pictures of the many points of the ECHR and say, this is what reform wants to take away from you.
Right.
And Morgoth always responds by saying, well, if you are white, if you are English, if you are ethnically European, some group within Europe, you do not have access to 0.5, 6, 8, 9, whichever are the ones that do things like protect you against unfair imprisonment, the ones that protect you as an indigenous group, the ones that protect you from being displaced from a homeland. You just don't have access or recourse to those.
No, not at all. Not at all. So this resistance that is inevitable must be prepared for. And there should be a level of honesty saying that there is going to be a few very difficult years after reform takes power because of this lawfare and economic warfare that will be waged and this sort of endless media campaigning. Like, you need to prepare your audience for the reality that things have to get worse before they get better. And you need to promise them something. For example, nasty HR ladies, like the ladies that we see in Parliament, will no longer have power over men. There's going to be changes to everything that allow people a level of freedom and liberty. The problem is that there isn't a positive message that's coming from the right. There isn't a positive message that says the bedrock of our beliefs is individual liberty, that this is a genuinely talented people that is truly capable, that has been held back deliberately by this state-dependent class, that the power of the state-dependent class is going to be removed, and the people will then be free to pursue their own well-being as they see fit.
Well, I would argue that there is actually a positive vision coming from the younger elements of the establishment right. You could, if you want to even call them establishment, like oftentimes I'll see former host Connor on Twitter responding to people who are disparaging Britain, disparaging English people. And he presents a very positive vision of what England was and what England should be in the future. I worry that it's some of the older generation, like Nigel Farage, who worry about the potential optics problems. Nigel Farage has already been accused of being mustache man throughout his entire career for the past 30 years. Absolutely. So I think he worries that if he puts forward a positive vision of the future that affirms that English people and British people in general could have something of value to offer to the world, not as just a set of abstract floating values, but as a real and distinct people, that he worries that he'll get even more of that aimed at him. To which I say, who cares?
Well, I mean, they're going to attack you for anything anyway. Yeah, go on.
I was just going to say that young people, have nothing to lose and everything to gain.
Yes.
Yeah. And so if that's not a good incentive, then I don't know what is.
Yes.
And any sensible leader should be leaning into this, because it's basically going to be your activist class, your most dedicated people with a lot of time and energy to put into it. And it would be silly to overlook.
And again, it shows kind of the generational age gap and the divide here, which is that for Farage, somebody who's part of the establishment, or at least has been, refer back to that old video of him dancing with Priti Patel and the rest of the Conservatives, right? For him, bad optics is affirming everything that we would like to affirm, because it would put the ick on him among those circles. Among the younger generations, it's good optics to do those things, because like you say, the younger generations, they see where this country is going. They've been living in this country for their entire lives as it has just continued to decline. So they see, a positive vision of the future that's working for me, specifically has my interests in mind. That's great. So the incentives are also very different there. And the major hope that I've seen a lot of people have is that Farage and other people of his age will be kind of pushed and guided by those younger than him by taking advice from them.
Hopefully. And the thing is that there is the uniqueness of the British government model, the sovereignty of Parliament, means that enormous things can be done quite quickly, especially in terms of defunding this massive blob that will always hate you and work against you in the civil service, in the NGOs, etc. And since judges in this country are appointed and can be appointed and removed by government, that is also an enormous lever of power. What needs to happen is genuine preparation for government. And that's not what we're seeing. Maybe it's being done under the table and it's hidden for strategic reasons. I hope so. There's no evidence of that. But that really is the issue. He can be a lot more vocal and a lot more effective if he promises that this sort of enemy caste that lives on the taxpayer and that always wants to extract more from the taxpayer to benefit migrants, legal and illegal, is going to be treated as an enemy, and is going to be made unemployed, and is going to be properly gutted. If he promises that, and the British model allows him to deliver that, all kinds of good things are possible. So the issue isn't the ECHR, important as it is in principle. The issue is that there's going to be total warfare against the next government, and preparations are necessary. He needs to be much better prepared for this.
If you would like to watch the full uncut version that is also uncensored, head on over to lotuseaters.com to find out more.